I'm Ashton Ratansi. We're going underground on the day. 3-year EU sanctions on Venezuela were set to expire as President Nicolas Maduro opens up the possibility of dialogue with a country arguably bent on its destruction, the United States. Coming up on the show, as Britain's second chamber rejects Boris Johnson's attempts to violate international law and break the Biden-backed Good Friday Agreement with Ireland for Brexit, one of President Obama's top advisors tells us whether the so-called special relationship is dead in the water. And could this be the man soon running Joe Biden's intelligence establishment?
We need to make the Russians pay a price. The other
Okay,
thing I would do...
We make them pay the price by killing Russians?
Yes.
And killing Iranians?
Yes. Covertly.
As rumors abound that Biden may pick hawks like Mike Morrell for the CIA, we ask Rolling Stone's Matt Taibbi about the potential for World War III, whoever ends up becoming US president in January. All this and more coming up in today's Going Underground. But first, this week, Britain's second chamber voted down Boris Johnson's attempts to break international law in the name of Brexit. Some say Johnson's actions have set him on a collision course with so-called US President-elect Joe Biden. Beyond that, after a president who didn't start any new wars, will Biden follow in Obama's footsteps in Libya and launch new conflicts in the global south? Joining me now is one of President Obama's top advisors who served under Clinton-Obama administrations as National Security Council Director for European Affairs and author of the new book, Isolationism, A History of America's Efforts to Shield Itself from the World. Professor Charles Krupchan joins me now via Skype from Chevy Chase in Maryland. Thanks so much, Charles, for coming on. Before I get to the book, if I may, what do you make of the fears here in Britain about a Biden presidency after he tweeted that UK violation of the Good Friday Agreement will impact on any post-Brexit trade deal?
You know, on balance, I think British folks should breathe a sigh of relief with Biden's election, in the sense that we will have again in the White House someone who values partnerships abroad, who believes in the transatlantic relationship, who believes in a strong Europe as a good partner. Does Biden support Brexit? No. When he was vice president, did his boss, Barack Obama, go to the UK and argue against Brexit? Yes. And so there will be some tough conversations between Boris Johnson and Joe Biden about this issue. But I think, listen, Biden is a pragmatist. He will want to maintain a good, strong relationship with the UK. I'm guessing his message will be twofold. One, try to keep as close a relationship to the EU as possible. And two, don't do anything that could upset the Good Friday Agreement or somehow undo the peace that has taken hold in Northern Ireland.
Well, Johnson has been relatively clear. I know that this new book, Isolationism, goes right back into the USA's past and arguably when the USA was a colony. You can't imagine there might be people here in Westminster who think and resent the idea of Biden telling Britain what to do?
Well, listen, times have changed. And I do think that going back in history, one can only believe that the special relationship will endure, because it really does go back to the 19th century. And the U.S. and the U.K. have been each other's best partners for well over a century. I do think that the special relationship will need some refurbishing. It will need investment, because Britain has segregated itself. It's backing away from Europe, and Europe aggregates Britain's power. That doesn't mean that Britain is going to drift off into the shadows, but I think it does mean that the British government should come up with a program about projecting power, about taking on new commitments, about being a player in Europe, to make sure that it remains as relevant a partner to the United States going forward as it has been in the past.
Well, as you make clear in the book, France is your oldest ally. And of course, those who support Brexit, they say there's no segregation. This is making it an international power when it comes to America first. I don't know how you've coped then with the way the Trump presidency has been chronicled by so-called mainstream media. You make it clear that this is much older than many of these journalists actually understand. America first.
Yeah, I mean, I am not a big fan of Donald Trump. I think his presidency has been very difficult for those of us who live here, very difficult for the rest of the world. He's in some ways taken a wrecking ball to the world America made in cooperation with its allies after World War II. But I do think it's a mistake to see Trump as some kind of bolt from the blue, as someone who broke in a fundamental way with American traditions because, as I discuss in the book, Trump's isolationism, his unilateralism, his protectionism, his racism, all of those attributes have very strong roots in American history, going back to the founders, going back to the late 1700s. And in some ways, I think Trump has demonstrated himself to be a very acute politician because he's been able to tap in to that different narrative, that different version of American exceptionalism, America as the city on the hill that stands aloof from the world, not the country that goes out to change the world. And so right now, I think as Biden prepares to take office, we do see the country going through a searching debate about the nature of its role moving forward. And my own view is it's time for the country to find the middle ground between where it was in the pre-Pearl Harbor era, which was doing too little and running away from the world, where it has been more recently, which is trying to do too much, particularly in the Middle East, to find that stable middle ground, to step back but not to step away.
Donald Trump obviously denies he's a racist, and things may be bad for you in the US under Trump as far as you see it, but surely the rest of the world, or large portions of it, have breathed a sigh of relief because Trump was attempting to draw down on troops. He wasn't going to bomb Syria maybe the way Hillary Clinton would have done in 2016 if she had won.
Well, I think that there is agreement here in the United States and in many other parts of the world that the United States did overstep in the Middle East, and that the wars in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya have not gone well. There are a few things Democrats and Republicans agree on today. I think one of them is it's time to reduce the U.S. footprint in the Middle East. And so I think the trend that Trump started, which is to get out of Syria, pull back from Afghanistan, pull back from Iraq, that will continue. Where I think you'll see a dramatic change is on the diplomatic front, because the isolationist sentiment that Trump demonstrated was coupled with a fierce unilateralism, pulling out of pacts, dissing allies. And I think Biden will do the opposite. He'll rejoin Paris. He'll rejoin the World Health Organization. He'll try to renegotiate the Iran nuclear deal. He'll breathe new life into NATO. So the U.S. will lean in diplomatically, even as it leans back militarily. And for me, that's exactly the right formula.
Or is that actually a cover for covert activity? Because obviously under Obama, there was, there was overt activity when Africa's richest per capita country was destroyed, all but destroyed by Obama. And we know that Biden has said he supports Juan Guaido in Venezuela, location of the world's greatest fossil fuel resources. We know he said to Putin he has to pay. This seems much tougher than anything Trump tends to say.
I think that Trump's relationship with Russia has been very strange, very difficult to unpack. He has shown some affinity for Vladimir Putin, even at a time when Putin has been interfering in American elections. And so I think what you'll see is a tougher line from Mr. Biden, but also a pragmatism, a willing to engage, a policy. There hasn't really been policy toward anything here in the United States. There's been a lot of tweeting, but I don't think there has been a sustained approach to Russia, to China, or to other major issues. And, going back to being a multilateral player doesn't, in my mind, mean anything covert. I think it means that the United States will reclaim its reputation, the mantle of being a coalition builder, and it will do so quite openly. And, even though there are some countries out there, Russia among them, that may have supported Trump's reelection, I think that in many respects, the chaos that Trump has created, the sense that the world is on edge, doesn't do anybody any good. And that I think the Russians and others that supported Trump will find the world a more predictable and a more peaceful place when there is someone in the White House that people trust.
Obviously, Putin and Russia deny any interference with foreign elections. So you're saying it will be tougher than under Trump, who, of course, expelled more Russian diplomats than any other president in history, who put more troops on Russia's borders than any in recent times, who has built and exaggerated the forces and also put more forces in the South China Sea against China. It's going to be more than Trump did against China and Russia.
I think on Russia, there will be what I would call a very frank conversation. And again, I think Mr. Biden is a pragmatist, and he will be open to a better relationship with Russia, but it will take give from the Russians. I think particularly on Ukraine, where Mr. Biden is committed to seeing the conflict in Donbass end, and that will take concessions by both Ukrainians but Russians as well, and the Kremlin needs to be prepared to do some hard work on that front. I think also on this question of interference in Western elections, there'll be tough conversations between Mr. Biden and Mr. Putin that never happened under Mr. Trump. And China as well. I think there'll be a dialogue that has essentially collapsed during the Trump era. Do the underlying issues suddenly disappear? No. There are conflicts of interest over trade, over security in the Western Pacific, over human rights. Those aren't going to go away. But I do think that there will be an effort to address these issues in a frank way between Washington and Beijing that really wasn't in place during the Trump presidency.
You see, the new book writes about non-isolationism, as it were, by the United States in so many countries that I can't even name them all, from Albania, Guatemala, Costa Rica, Syria, Egypt the first time, Ecuador, Vietnam. You don't think the Trump presidency has led many in the global South, let alone in Moscow and Beijing, to think, what gives the right of the United States to mess around in any world issues at all? It is a country that has led wars that have killed, wounded, or displaced tens of millions of people just in the past decade. It has no right to do anything anymore.
Well, you know, one of the things I wanted to expose in the book is that that's relatively new, and that from 1789 until the end of the 19th century, the United States was quite expansionist in North America, right? It pushed right across to the Pacific coast, took land from Mexico, trampled on Native Americans, but then it stopped and it went no further. And it really did follow the guidance of the founders, which was we should have commercial connections with everybody, but political and geopolitical connections with no one. That starts to change with the Spanish-American War, and the United States becomes particularly interventionist in the Western Hemisphere. And that really does begin the era that continues after 1941 of a robust American engagement. Has the United States made mistakes in its foreign policy? Yes. Was the decision to invade Iraq under George W. Bush a mistake that we will be paying for quite some time? Yes. And I think Americans have realized that those mistakes have been made. And that's one of the reasons that we're seeing the pendulum swing back toward a more selective brand of engagement on the military front. And that's why I think you'll see the retrenchment that began under Trump continue under Mr. Biden, particularly when it comes to commitments in the Middle East.
We'll have to talk about that defense budget next time. Professor Charles Krupchan, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
After the break, are the progressive left in the USA self-delusional about pushing Biden to the left when it comes to war, inequality, and capitalism? We talk to great derangement author, Rolling Stone's Matt Taibbi. All this and more coming up in part 2 of Going Underground.